So keyboards, alright? Okay, so before anyone asks me what right I have to be making this video, shut up. It's Sunday and I've been editing an IamNerow stream for a while now, link to him in the description. So I said, fuck it, I've wanted to make this video for a while, I will make this fucking video. Also, just side note, personal life has got in the way of other things a little bit, so the next devlog has been delayed tiny bit. Skyrim video's done, that's set for its release date of whenever the fuck I said, 11th of November 2021, that's all fine. But yes, next devlog has been delayed because I haven't done anything on it. Anyway, keyboards. If you've been around since the late 1970s, you've probably used one at some point or another in your life. And chances are it was a membrane keyboard. Well, not if it was before the late 90s, because that was back when IBM's buckling springs. Anyway, mid to late 90s, that's when membrane keyboards really took off as a cheaper alternative to other keyboards. They were cheaper to manufacture and cheaper to distribute. They were lighter, so they took up less space. Anyway, a membrane keyboard is a keyboard which uses a sheet of rubber with domes on them to push down on the PCB, the circuit board which runs underneath everything and which knows which key is which. They're usually pretty mushy and pretty quiet. These two keyboards that you'll be seeing on screen now are both fairly decent membrane boards. I mean, this one which I took apart doesn't work and has a couple of keys which are just stuck down, which is why I used it to be the take it apart one, but the keys on it are fairly decent. Here's a sound test for both of them, and the second one actually works, so there's some type tracer footage to go with it. Now, type racer. That's fuck. I didn't set up OBS before. Can you tell I'm a professional? So that gives you a good idea of how a membrane keyboard is probably going to sound. These keys are pretty firm for membranes, but overall are actually still pretty mushy. In the mechanical keyboard world, you're going to hear lots of words like pre-travel, actuation, and tactile bump. So here I'm going to do my best to actually explain what that means so you get a better understanding of it before you go and watch other mechanical keyboard videos and get really fucking confused, which is what happened to me. So, these keys have basically no pre-travel before the tactile bump, which means that I have to apply a fair amount of pressure before the key will give. This give is the tactile bump, and from there I am free to continue the rest of the key press. Tactile bump is light, which just, you know, I press a key, it feels like you have to put in some effort to make the key move, but once it does it moves. Keyboards like this are not very firmly built and bend quite easily. In fact, both of these rattle on my desk as I'm typing on them because they've been sitting in a cupboard for some time and have warped a fair amount. So, now let's say you want to be free of this tyranny. You want to be free of this tyranny. There, we said it. Now, what can you actually do about it? Well, the first step for anyone would be to get an entry-level mechanical keyboard, and that's where I come in. You see, the custom mechanical keyboard scene is an expensive and scary place, and God forbid you're browsing, you know, Reddit or something, and it's like, what the fuck, that's gorgeous, I want it, but, oh fuck, that's a mortgage right there. So, you've got things like lube, different keyboard sizes, different switches, switch types, top plates, rubber domes, foam. I didn't mean rubber domes, I meant O-rings. I was just making this bit up. I should go back to reading the script. The best way to get introduced to all of these ideas is to start with a couple of pre-built keyboards and slowly build up to custom boards, if you're serious about it. Otherwise, mechanical keyboards are just a better alternative to rubber membranes, and you don't have to get into the custom scene. So, here we have two budget mechanical keyboards and a slightly less budget one for comparison. This is the Drevo Tirefing V2 hot swappable TKL board with Outemu blues, £55 approx. Don't worry, I'll explain what all of that means in just a second. brand. This is the Grevogramma 75% board with Outemu Browns, which is £35 to £40 approximately. And this comparison board is the Filco Magistouch TKL with Cherry MX Browns, which is £110 approximately at the time of purchase, £140 approximately adjusting for inflation, because this board is like 10 years old or something. Still going strong. So first things first, let's talk about keyboard profiles. These membrane boards are full-size keyboards, however a lot of keyboards that are marketed towards gamers, despite being immensely cringe, do have at least one bonus. They're designed for PC games, and therefore want to have more space for the mouse. So a common form factor is the TKL, or 10 keyless layout. This means the board doesn't have a numpad on it, as seen in the Drevo Typhing V2 and the Filco Magistouch. However, lots of people like to have smaller keyboards than that, which is when you get into things like this. The Grevogramma is a 75% layout board, which means it still has an arrow cluster and the page up, page down, home, insert keys, and a function row, much like a TKL, but it's in a more condensed layout than the TKL. Many custom boards go even smaller, and lots of the ones you'll see go for a 60% layout, which doesn't have arrow keys or a function row. And yeah, they look cute, but I could never fucking use one. I use the arrow keys for moving the cursor without reaching for a mouse, and I literally need a function row in order to use a script that I have running all the time on my computer. Also, that script needs a numpad, but I have an external numpad, don't worry about it. There's a number of different keyboard profiles. There's 60%, 65%, I think you can even get like 45%, which don't even have numbers or backspaces, so what the fuck they're used for, I don't know. But they exist. But that's the different keyboard profiles. Now we're going to talk about the key switches. This is kind of the money shot. This is the bit that everybody likes about keyboards. That's not entirely true. This is the fun bit about keyboards, though. There are a number of other variables in building custom keyboards, but let's not worry about that for now. Switches are the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on the feel of your keyboard and the sound of your keyboard. And there are three main categories of switch. That's technically a lie, because there's also buckling springs, and I think contactless switches count as linears, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, that's all unimportant for now. Let's start with the three main types of switch. These are linear switches, tactile switches, and clicky switches. These are all similar, but subtly different. Linear switches are switches that are continuous throughout, have a continuous amount of force required throughout the key travel, from top to bottom. They have very little resistance. You just push down and it goes down and it comes up again. It's kind of hard to explain, but you'll get a picture of it after I explain the others. Examples of these are things like Cherry MX Reds, C3 Tangerines, and Gatoron Yellows. Next category are tactile switches, which have a slight notch on the switch, causing a tactile bump. The size of this notch will affect the severity of the tactile bump. Here you can see a Zelio V2 on the left, sat next to an MX Brown on the right. You can see the difference in the notch quite clearly. Examples of tactile switches are Zelios V2s, Holy Pandas, and Cherry MX Browns. Before we move on to clicky switches, let's just quickly address something. There's a pretty big meme in the custom keyboard community, glasses looking at you, that Cherry MX Browns are terrible switches. And this stems from the fact that they're marketed as tactile switches, but they have a pretty weak tactile bump. You can see here on the Filco I get very little resistance as I push down on the switch, so they feel more like linears than tactiles. And this doesn't mean that MX Browns are actually bad switches. In the end, it all comes down to preference. I like MX Browns for typing, but in general, I prefer tactility in my switches, especially for gaming. So, be warned, if you go for MX Browns, they're going to feel more linear than something like a Zelio, but Zelios are just under $1 a switch at the moment, which is ridiculously expensive. Anyway, final category of switches are clicky switches. These are like tactile switches, but with either a click jacket or a click bar in the switch. Now, I don't know exactly what this means or how it works, but basically it just means that loud, clickety-clickety-click. Examples of clicky switches include Box Jades, MX Blues, and Speed Pinks. What you want from a keyboard will affect what switches you get. But you can usually get a starting point, at least from sound. So, you remember how we did some sound tests for the membrane keyboards at the beginning? Well, we're going to do a similar thing for each of these mechanical keyboards while also outlining some of their features. So, first off, let's take a look at the Filco Magistouch with Cherry MX Browns. As I said, this one's the most expensive keyboard here. It's $130, $140 on Amazon now. Pounds, Great British pounds. I wasn't working in dollars, never mind. But, 140 odd. So in dollars, that's $150, $160. That's a terrible conversion, but that's the rough ballpark you're looking in. Now, this one has Cherry MX Browns, and is also quite old, so it's not going to be entirely representative of what you're going to get if you buy one of these today. For starters, there's gunk like under the keys. It's kind of manky. I borrowed this keyboard, otherwise I would clean it, I swear, but it's just not mine. And I think the owner would get angry if I just started yanking off his keycaps. A number of the keycaps have just straight up fucking started rubbing off. The cable's non-removable and there's no backlighting. It does, however, have N-key rollover, so you can just push down as many of these keys as you want and you'll be fine. The keyboard doesn't come with any software, so there's no built-in macro functionality, but honestly, that's not an issue if you learn to write auto hotkey scripts. So here's a typing demonstration. There's some sound for you. Next up is the Dravogramma 75% board with Autemu Browns. This board has much more compact form factor, which is why I use it for school, because it's easy to get in a bag. It's basically all plastic, so it feels much cheaper than either the Tire Thing or the Filco, but that's kind of to be expected given that it is the cheapest board of the three. This particular model only has white backlights, but there is an RGB option. However, given the quality of these lights, I expect that the RGB would be of dubious quality. Autemu Browns are basically just MX Brown clones, but in my experience they have a slightly larger tactile bump. This board comes with a removable braided USB-C capable, which is actually really high quality. It also has kind of crap cable gutters. There's no software to control this board, but you can tweak lighting with the function key and the arrow keys. You can also use the FN button to lock the Windows key, lock the entire keyboard, and switch the F keys to be media control keys, so you can like pause, turn volume up, etc. Here's a typing demonstration. Last but not least is the Drevo Tire Thing V2 with Autemu Blues. I do not actually have any MX Blues on hand to compare this to, but they're pretty similar, being MX Blue clones. This is by far the most feature-rich board of the lot, featuring full RGB, onboard macro support, good cable gutters, although the cord is non-removable, and some software to go with, you know, everything. It does macros, it does lighting. Although I quite like the software, it's decent. I configured the lighting to my tastes and haven't opened it since. The macro support is really good, and you have to have the software running in the background if you want to use it, but again, learn to write auto hotkey scripts. You don't need it, so I don't have it running in the background. The lighting still works because it's got onboard memory. The build quality of this board is good. It's like a middle ground between the Filco and the Gramma, so it's got a metal top plate and plastic everywhere else, and actually pretty good cable gutters on the bottom. Last but not least, it's hot swappable, which neither of the other boards are. What this means is that you can just pull out switches, you don't have to desolder them from underneath, which is brilliant, because it means that I could just remove all the switches from this and put in anything else. I could swap in some Autemu Browns if I had them, or fuck it, just go really overboard and take this £50 board and spend almost twice that on enough Zelios to go in it, and fuck it, Zelios. I'm not going to do that yet, but yeah, it'd be funny. This board is my daily driver when I'm at home, and I really, really like it. That being said, the blue switches are clicky as hell, and they're definitely not for everyone. So here's a typing demonstration. In conclusion, your first mechanical board is not going to be the most amazing sounding tear-type stocky keyboard ever, but if you start off with entry-level budget boards and, like, get a feel for what you like, you can then do your research and build up to building your perfect keyboard. You see, after using these boards, I know that I don't much care about RGB. I like higher profile boards like the Filco, but I also like clicky responsive switches, although I would kill for a set of Zelios right now. There's also much more detail to mechanical keyboards and custom boards, and I've heavily simplified basically everything in this video. I haven't even touched on things like looping and filming switches, which will drastically change the feel and sound of them. This was just meant to be an introduction to the idea of mechanical boards and a way to get into the hobby if you're interested. I hope this was in some way informative or entertaining to at least one person. Anyway, if you'll excuse me, the police are probably closing in, so I'm gonna have to go.
We're rolling deep into your underground grave. Load a center prior.